everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely pumped to have you here today because we're diving into a topic that literally sounds like pure science fiction, but it's actually happening right now in the real world. We are looking at the incredibly fascinating and honestly kind of unsettling intersection of human grief, cinematic illusion, and artificial intelligence. We're going to explore how we mourn, how we remember, and how technology is fundamentally rewriting the rules of the afterlife. To really set the stage for this, let's start with a massive, mind-bending question from Boston College's Scott Kiernan. Can humankind survive immortality? Picture this, the heavy, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in a completely empty room. Every single tick kind of feels like a countdown to our own mortality, right? For centuries, that ticking was just inevitable. Death was final. But what if we could stop the clock? What if the echoes of the people we love never actually had to fade away?
Okay, let's jump straight into Section 1, the anatomy of illusion.
So before we can really grasp how AI is resurrecting the dead, we have to look at how media has basically always manipulated our feelings around mortality. For a long time, filmmakers were the ultimate masters of this illusion. Documentary directors use very specific physical and visual tools to engineer our emotional vulnerability. You know those locked-off, super distant camera shots? A director uses those to physically trap a character in their environment, making them look incredibly small and isolated in their grief. They'll use Rembrandt lighting to cast these heavy, dramatic shadows that literally weigh down the frame. And when they need to show the sheer psychological disorientation of loss or conditions like Alzheimer's, they bust out swing and tilt lenses to shift the focal plane, making the whole world on screen feel totally off balance.
But you know, it's not just what you see, it's what you hear. Audio engineers are absolute experts at hacking our deepest psychological fears. That slow ticking of a clock, it isn't just a sound. It's this subconscious reminder of grandfather time and, well, the Grim Reaper. The sharp snap of a breaking branch in a dark forest instantly foreshadows the unknown. Unsteady breathing, isolated and amplified, that instantly triggers our primal anxiety. Filmmakers have spent over a century perfecting the art of simulating life, death, and fear using these precise sensory hacks. Which brings us to Section 2, enter the digital ghosts. Because we really have to ask, what happens when the subject of that documentary or the voice breathing heavily in the audio isn't actually real? Enter the Deadbot, or the grief bot. Basically, this is a digital avatar created with AI, natural language processing, and machine learning, and it's designed to approximate the personality of someone who has passed away. We've effectively moved from a film director creating a narrative on a screen to an AI developer creating artificial intimacy in real time. And this isn't some far-off, distant future thing. The evolution here is staggeringly fast. Look at the timeline. Back in 2016, we saw early text-based experiments like the Grandpa Bot and the Roman Bot. Just 2 years later, in 2018, parents of a Parkland shooting victim used AI to recreate their son's voice for political advocacy. Fast forward to 2021, and Project December made massive headlines when a man used it to build a highly convincing chatbot of his late fiancée. And then, by 2025, we crossed a huge legal boundary. An AI-generated video avatar of a murder victim, Chris Pelkey, actually delivered a posthumous impact statement in an Arizona courtroom. No way, right? It's absolutely wild.
So how exactly does this work? Well, AI algorithms are picking up right where the filmmakers left off. They take your digital footprint, we're talking your emails, your random voice notes, your photos, and they perform that exact same psychological hacking. Except instead of a locked-off camera shot, the AI is learning your loved one's specific speech patterns. It's learning their sense of humor. It simulates life and intimacy so convincingly that it essentially bridges the gap between memory and active presence. Let's move on to Section 3, commodifying grief and tragedy. Because, as we all know, where there is deep human vulnerability, there's almost always a market. Get a load of this number, $80 billion. According to insights from Boston College, market research projects that the digital legacy industry is going to quadruple to hit this staggering valuation over the next 10 years. We are literally talking about an entirely new economic sector built entirely around the afterlife. And you can already see our culture reflecting this huge shift. On one hand, let's call it side A, we have data researcher Chris Riva. He mapped the history of pop music and found that in past eras, we mostly just sang about death. Think about those tragic teen hits from the 1950s. But now, look at side B. Lior Torenberg's novel Just Watch Me explores a much more modern phenomenon. It's about a protagonist who live streams her own personal tragedy to raise money for her comatose sister. We've shifted from just observing death to actively commodifying personal tragedy for clicks, tips, and attention in the digital economy.
The big takeaway here is that the afterlife is officially open for business. Real-world tech startups in China are already offering grief avatars for as little as $3, capitalizing on traditional festivals to reunite families with these moving, speaking digital clones. Over in the West, companies are offering interactive video interviews, and some are even charging users to participate in faux supernatural AI seances. We are witnessing the raw, unfiltered commercialization of mourning.
Okay, which naturally brings us to Section 4, the ethics of resurrection, because this technological Wild West has created an absolute labyrinth of moral dilemmas.
The biggest issue here is what ethicists call the consent dilemma. It's a tale of two very different approaches. Side A is pre-mortem consent. This is where you, while you are still alive, authorize and plan out your digital legacy. You record the stories, you set the boundaries. Simple enough, right? But side B is where things get incredibly murky. Post-mortem scraping. This happens when a tech company or even just a well-meaning relative takes your social media trails and your private texts and resurrects you without your permission. It begs the question, do we lose our right to privacy the exact moment we die?
And if you think the consent issue is complicated, Science News explored some dystopian scenarios that are totally wild, but technologically very possible right now. Imagine a terminally ill parent leaving a grief bot for an 8-year-old child who can't fully grasp the finality of death. Or imagine a parent secretly buying a 20-year subscription so their grieving adult children suddenly get a perfectly written email from a bot of their dead father days after the funeral. Or, and this one is dark, but it perfectly illustrates the risk of commercialization, an AI grandma that gives you her famous spaghetti recipe, but then covertly pushes a sponsored food delivery service. Actually, scratch that, it sounds completely absurd, but it is 100% possible.
All of this leads directly into a fierce psychological debate. Experts are completely split. Side A argues that these avatars are a fantastic therapeutic tool. They allow for something called continuing bonds, which basically gives the bereaved a way to say a gradual, controlled farewell. But side B, they warn that this is a highly dangerous illusion. It runs the risk of trapping people in a state of locked, complicated grief, where they become so dependent on the simulation that they can never truly accept the reality of their loss. So what do we do about it? Let's look at Section 5, Designing an Ethical Afterlife.
How do we even begin to regulate something this deeply personal? Well, researchers from the University of Zurich have proposed a framework, basically building a taxonomy of digital ghosts. Notice how a legacy avatar relies on explicit pre-mortem consent and is usually kept completely private for the family. That is entirely different from a celebrity simulation, which is highly public, uses deepfake video and audio, and relies on surrogate consent, or honestly, sometimes no consent at all. The ethical rules here just cannot be one size fits all.
To figure out if a digital ghost is actually morally legitimate, ethicists look at a bunch of specific dimensions. They look at the timing of creation, like was this made before or after the person died? They look at the source of the data, how interactive and lifelike the avatar is, its true purpose, who actually has access to it, and crucially, how much autonomy the AI has to just invent new responses on the fly. So, to satisfy all those dimensions, researchers argue that we have to follow these 5 steps for building an ethical AI. 1. Establish pre-mortem intent, the person actually has to want this. 2. Ensure mutual consent from both the deceased and the survivor. 3. Guarantee transparent disclosure, meaning the user must never ever forget they are talking to a machine. 4. Restrict it to minimal behavioral agency. The AI shouldn't be making up brand new memories. And 5. Maintain family stewardship, so massive commercial entities don't end up owning your loved one's legacy. Ultimately, an ethical AI should be an archivistic tool of memory, right? Not a generative puppet with a mind of its own. Which brings us to one incredibly profound question that I want to leave you with today. As this AI technology seamlessly blends the lines between real life and simulation, we really have to ask ourselves, do these digital ghosts actually help us remember the ones we love? Or do they just prevent us from letting go? Think about that for a bit. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the world around you, and I will catch you next time.